Hi, everyone. Maggie O here with Homeschool with Maggie O, and we're continuing our science curriculum review series. Today, we're looking at Berean Builders, created by Dr. Jay Weil, and this one gives us another really interesting combination. We're looking at a Christian Science curriculum. We're looking at a curriculum with a very long, strong, hands-on component. And we're looking at science taught within its historical context. Especially in the elementary years, we're looking at something that can be used with multiple ages at the same time. So if you're homeschooling several children and thinking, Maggie, I do not want to teach three separate science curricula every afternoon, pay attention to this one. We're going to look at the elementary program, move into junior high, take a look at high school biology, and then we'll put Berean Builders through my curriculum fit lens. So let's get started. Let me share my screen. Right here on the homepage, Berean Builders tells us quite a bit about what they're trying to accomplish. They talk about helping students think critically, explore boldly, and discover the world God created. So immediately we know two things. This is distinctly Christian science, and the curriculum isn't intended to be only about memorizing science facts. Critical thinking is a major part of the philosophy behind the program. And I want you to notice this section. They describe science as more than memorizing vocabulary or completing tabs, or completing labs. They want students to learn how to ask good questions. They want to have students evaluate the evidence and think logically and discover truth. That's an important distinction because one of the things we should be asking when we compare curriculum is, what is this curriculum actually asking my child to do with the information? Are they memorizing it, discussing it, experimenting with it, applying it, analyzing it? Berean Builders puts a significant emphasis on understanding how scientific ideas develop and learn to think through evidence. You'll also see that experiments and demonstrations are intentionally woven into the curriculum. They're not simply an optional page in the back of the book that you may or may not even get to. And we're going to see that very clearly when we open the elementary curriculum. This is Science in the Beginning. And this is the first book in Berean Builders Elementary Science Through History series. This curriculum is designed for kindergarten through sixth grade. But here's the important part, it is multi level. You can see that here in the description. Each lesson has three different levels to review. So the parent can adjust how deeply each child is expected to understand and respond to the material. That means you could potentially have several elementary aged children learning the same science lesson together while expecting different levels of work from each child. For a larger homeschool family, that can be extremely helpful. Each lesson is built around an activity or an experiment. And I was wanting to kind of drill down in here a little bit more for you too. You can read these reviews as well. Here is a text sample, a lab supply list by lesson, consolidated lab list, scope and sequence, a printable notebook for older, printable notebook oldest, and a journey through learning binder builders. Let's look at the scope and sequence. And this is obviously meant for the parent to look through. Text sample. Here we go. You can look at the lesson here. Um, The complete course does contain a roughly about 90 hours of instruction and approximately 35 hours of hands-on activity. So when I call this hands-on science, I don't mean there's an experiment every third Friday if you happen to have time. Hands-on learning is a significant part of this course. Science in the beginning uses the biblical days of creation as the framework for introducing scientific concepts. Students study things like light, energy, air, water, botany, the solar system, zoology. Here's your supply list. See here, it's talking about the science in the first day of creation. So this isn't 1 year of only biology or 1 year of only earth science either. And aspects of human anatomy and physiology are also studied. You're exploring a range of scientific concepts through the framework of the creation account. And obviously, worldview matters here. Berean Builders is Christian. God as creator is part of the curriculum. This is not a secular science program with a Bible verse added to the top of the worksheet. You can clearly see that here. Faith and science are intentionally connected throughout the material. And we'll talk more about worldview at the end. But here is a bunch of resources that you'll be able to look into. Okay. Another thing I want you to understand about the elementary series is that it follows science through history. And that's a little bit different than what we've seen up until now. After science in the beginning, Builders has books included Science in the Ancient World, um, Science in the Scientific Revolution, Science in the Age of Reason, and Science in the Industrial Age. So children are learning scientific concepts while also seeing how scientific understanding developed through history. And for my classical homeschool families, your ears may have just perked up because the idea of connecting science with historical periods can work very nicely with a history centered or chronological homeschool. But Berean Builders also says you don't have to use the elementary books in a rigid order. The elementary focus is much more on discovery and observation than checking off a particular sequence or required science facts. So there is flexibility here. Now let's move on into the junior high age. And this is science in the atomic age. Berean Builders places this at approximately seventh grade in its recommended course progression, and there is no prerequisite. And you'll immediately see that we're stepping up academically. I encourage you to really follow this description. It begins with topics including atoms, molecules, chemicals necessary for life, DNA, and cells. But once again, these topics are taught within their historical context. Students aren't only learning, here is what scientists currently believe. They're also learning, how did scientists figure this out? And that's a very different question. And I really like that distinction from from a critical thinking standpoint. And then the course moves into the organization of living things, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organisms, populations, community, ecosystems, and biomes. And the curriculum also discusses God's design in nature and issues within the creation evolution debate. And again, the hands on component is substantial. Berean Builders, um, they focus through the experiments. Um, the Berean builders say students will actually have more science days with an experiment or activity than days without one, and that is significant. Most of those experiments use items that you can find at home or purchase from places like grocery stores, drugstores, or hardware stores. But I'm still going to give you the same warning I've given with every hands-on curriculum. Look ahead. Don't wait until Tuesday morning to discover that today's experiment requires something that you don't have. And that you'll also, students generally need approximately 30 to 45 minutes per day to complete this course over a school year. And you'll notice we're also beginning to see more structure. Here's your table of contents. Text sample. There's review questions. There's testing. It is text heavy. Comprehension check. There's suggested daily assignment. There is a suggested daily assignment schedule and worksheets. Here's an example of the worksheet. And students, a student workbook resource as well. So again, you would want to visit with your child on this. These are for junior high level kiddos. So we're transitioning from family style elementary exploration toward more independent secondary science. And let's look at the scope and sequence. This course is not for high school credit. And there's a total of 58 experiments in this course, representing roughly 45 hours of lab work. Here's a daily schedule assignment. I think we looked at this. We did. Okay. So then we're going to look at high school biology. There is biology. There's also, hang on, there's also, they have chemistry, physics, and earth science. But one thing you'll need to understand and pay attention to is prerequisites columns when it comes to this. Biology doesn't have a math prerequisite listed. Chemistry requires Algebra 1, and physics requires Algebra 1, geometry, and basic trigonometry. So that when you're looking under the high school, there's also online classes. But if we go to chemistry, Here's the recorded classes are available on for this subject, and they're taught by Dr. Wiley. Has all of the lab and the information that you're going to need here. And you can watch this video on it as well. And this is why I don't want you choosing high school curriculum based only on the number printed next to the child's grade. You have to look at readiness, really. Um, I think I mentioned, physics, you're going to need a algebra 1 geometry and basic trig functions before you come into the physics, which would make sense, really. But you just want to make sure about your child's readiness, and especially in science and math. Berean Builders actually emphasizes that math preparation is one of the most important factors in determining whether a student is ready for upper level science. So, if you have a ninth grader who's significantly ahead in math, their science progression may look different from a ninth grader who's still building those skills, and that's okay. We're looking for readiness, not racing. This is Discovering Design with Biology that's here on the screen, and this is designed as a laboratory based college preparatory high school biology course. The course does contain approximately 180 hours of instruction. And I think I mentioned a minute ago that 40 of those hours involve hands on experiments. So this is a substantial science course. This course begins at the foundational level with molecules and cells and then builds toward animals, plants, ecosystems, biomes. And students are not simply learning isolated facts. The material is intentionally built so that the concepts connect to one another. Now, before we finish, I really want you to see this page. This is the Berean Builders curriculum samples and product resource page, and there is a lot here. Look at all this. They organize the resources by course, depending upon the curriculum you may find. Table of contents, text samples, lab supply lists, scope and sequence documents, printable notebooks, workbooks, worksheets, suggested daily schedules, and experiment information. So, if you're considering science in the beginning, don't buy it blind. Right here, download all this. Look at the supply list, look at the printable notebook, read an actual lesson. And then they have it for junior high, and here's high school. And if you're choosing a high school science, I would be even more deliberate. Look at the samples and look at the scope and sequence, look at the experiments, the schedule, and look at what your student is actually expected to complete, because high school biology can look very different from one publisher to another. So let's put Berean Builders through my Maggie O curriculum fit lens. For teaching approach, Berean Builders is strongly hands-on and inquiry oriented, but it also has a very distinctive historical component. Students aren't simply taught scientific facts. They're often shown how scientific ideas developed and how people reached those conclusions. Especially in the elementary science through history series, science and history are intentionally connected. As far as the parent involvement in elementary school, I would call parent involvement moderate to high. You're going to be teaching or reading the lesson, you're facilitating experiments, you're helping younger students, and you're adjusting to the review work according to each child's level. As students move into junior high and high school, the curriculum becomes increasingly student directed. Other students have older students have the daily assignments that we were looking at, textbooks, text, and laboratory work that they can manage with great independence. For learning style fit, this could be a particularly strong fit for kinesthetic and hands on learners. Experiments aren't an occasional bonus, they're central to the program. I also think it has something interesting to offer students who love history and stories because scientific discoveries are presented in historical context. So it gives it a different perspective on how it's presented. And visual learners have diagrams, illustrations, experiments, and observations supporting the text. For family learning consideration, this is one of Berean Builder's biggest strengths at the elementary level. The elementary courses are designed for K through 6 and include multiple levels of review. So several children can learn the same science topic together without requiring your kindergarten and your sixth grader to produce identical work. If you're homeschooling multiple elementary children, I would absolutely put a star next to this one because that's a really strong feature. According to thinking about homeschool philosophy fit, I think I think this could fit several different homeschool approaches. Classical families may appreciate science presented chronologically through history. Eclectic families may appreciate the flexibility. Traditional homeschool families may appreciate that the increasing structure, especially at the secondary level. And families who prioritize hands on learning have a lot here to work with. For the worldview perspective, Berean Builders teaches from a Christian worldview. God as creator is explicitly part of the curriculum. Science in the beginning uses the biblical creation account as its framework. And the secondary courses continue to discuss science in relationship to Christian belief. But I want to make an important distinction here. Berean Builders also emphasizes critical thinking and examining different positions on some issues rather than just simply pretending that disagreements don't exist. So if your worldview is important to your family, I would still encourage you to read the actual samples rather than assuming that every Christian Science publisher handles every issue exactly the same way. As far as preparation, here's what I want you to be. This is where I want you to be realistic. This is hands on science. Hands on science requires stuff. Now, many of the elementary and junior high experiments intentionally use a common household material or materials, and that's great, but you still have to gather them. High school laboratory courses become more involved and may require microscope studies, dissection materials, and other specialized equipment, as you could well imagine. And use those supply lists before the school year begins to make sure that you have everything that's on that list. As far as independence, elementary independence is very low. Junior high, it's increasing towards independence, and high school considerably more independent. And I think that progression makes sense. You're doing science with your elementary children and gradually moving toward a teenager who can manage a series of college prep science courses more independently. The academic depth, this is another area where Berean Builders becomes particularly interesting. The elementary years are intentionally focused on discovery and observation. Then the expectation increases. By high school, you're looking at laboratory based college prep science. So there is a genuine academic progression rather than simply doing elementary style science and with harder vocabulary, let's say. And who I think Berean Builders may fit best, I would put Berean Builders on your research list if you want Christian Science, you want hands on experiments to be a significant part of learning, you're homeschooling multiple aged children together, you enjoy connecting subjects like science and history. You want your child learning how scientific ideas developed, not simply memorizing conclusions. You value critical thinking. You want a curriculum that can grow with your student from elementary into serious high school science. Or you have a child who says, can we do an experiment every time you open the science book? Who may want to keep on looking? I would continue comparing if you want a secular science, you want completely online science, you strongly dislike gathering experiment supplies, you want elementary science that your young child can complete almost entirely independently. your child strongly prefers short video lessons over textbook reading, or you simply don't want hands on experiments to occupy a major part of your science week. And one more thing I really like, I appreciate the emphasis on teaching children to think, because science isn't simply here's the answer, memorize it for Friday. Science involves observation, questions, evidence, mistakes, new discoveries, and sometimes changing our understanding when new evidence becomes available. Connecting scientific concepts to the people who discovered them can help children understand that process. And that's something Berean Builders does differently from many of the programs we've looked at. So that is our look at Berean Builders. This one gives us another very distinctive option in our science curriculum review series: Christian worldview, science through history, a significant hands on component, multiple aged elementary learners, and a pathway that eventually moves into rigorous college prep, high school science. Does that automatically make it the best science curriculum? No. But if you have a hands-on learner, several elementary children you're trying to teach together, or a family that loves connecting history, faith, and science, this is absolutely one I would investigate. And remember, we're not looking for the curriculum everybody else says is the best. We're looking for the curriculum that fits your child, your teaching style, and your homeschool goals. I'm Maggie O with Homeschool with Maggie O, your homeschool mentor. And I look forward to seeing you at our next science curriculum review. Until next time, happy homeschooling.